How do modern leaders navigate the complex terrain of a global network and also share leadership? Hello, my name is Z.
And I'm Rich. In this episode, we'll delve into the concept of shared leadership within the framework of matrix management. This is taking teams to a whole new level.
That's right. And speaking of a whole new level, we took the podcast to a whole new level. We were at actually our Sales Rally Amplify event, where we not only brought all of our teammates, but our partners, our community, our network of community into here at Bronte, Arizona. And it was a fun session. And speaking of that, we did a podcast there, recorded, and got a lot of good feedback and a lot of good questions that we're going to share with you today and capture some of those audios and answer for our audience in this episode. Speaking of that, was that your first Amplify, like actually being involved and doing some?
Yeah, very first, very fun. Fun to be in a room full of people breaking out, talking about the things that we do here at Insight.
So just to kind of set the stage, right, we had a breakout sessions, and we talked about this topic specifically. And we did capture a lot of, it's one of those topics that we're currently working on here at Insight. We want to continue to improve the experience for our teammates, but also helping our leaders understand or give them the right tools to be effective leaders to help them accomplish their goals, not only in their day-to-day work, but also their development in their career. So we're excited to have this topic, and we have a special guest with us today, my fearless leader, our VP of HR, specifically under the Diversity, Leadership, and OD space, Michelle Reaux. So Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so good to be here again with the two of you talking about this. Right? It was really fun doing that at Amplify. Loved it.
It was. This is our take two now in a quiet setting, so we can really focus and provide you some good insights into this topic. But Michelle, for those who don't know you outside of Insight, because everybody at Insight knows you.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Tell us a little about your role and what you do for us here.
So I'm Michelle Reaux, and like you said, lead Diversity, Leadership, and OD, which I love. I actually came over through acquisition in 2008, left for a little bit, and I've been back again for 10 years this year. So Diversity, Leadership, and OD is about to rebrand to Culture and Engagement too. So that's super exciting. So more to come on that. But we do everything from all the recognition programs and performance management and leadership and pretty much anything that you can imagine that comes down to culture and engagement. So I love every single second to be in here.
Yeah. And again, awesome. I mean, I enjoy being part of the team. We've had such a phenomenal ride and continue to just have that exposure to, our teammates, the organization, the business, and we get to hear a lot of stories and areas that we can continue to improve because, you know what, we can never hit a point where we're like, oh, we're perfect. Look, there's nothing else to work on. Michelle, as we know, there's always something that we can work on all the time.
Always.
So today's episode, we're going to unpack it in a couple of things. We'll talk about first, what is, a network or matrix management, and then also what is this whole thing about shared leadership. We'll dive into maybe some best practices or areas to overcome. And then finally, how can we leverage this to really help maximize our teams and our organization to that next level?
Perfect.
So we'll have a couple questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for being back here with us, Michelle.
Of course.
And congratulations on 10 years as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we unpack this, can you tell us a little bit about the concept behind matrix connectivity and its synergy with shared leadership?
Absolutely. So matrix management has been around for a very long time. And matrix management is really the idea that different teams have the responsibility for one shared outcome, one shared goal, but there's different roles and there's different responsibilities to get to that goal. So the idea of matrix connectivity is how do we have the right people that we need on the right teams and the right projects with the right clients, and how do we lead those teams in an effective way to where there's trust, there's respect, there's communication, there's results, and we're using all of the tools that we have currently in place to make that happen. So it's really taking that connection of so many different people and figuring out how do we lead in the best possible way to get the best possible results.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, it's funny that you said the right, right? Because again, it takes a team, and it's putting the right people in the right place, but giving them the support, the tools, the resource, and you mentioned trust, and
absolutely.
So just some backstory, right? We're currently in the process of providing some training, some resources to our teammates and our leaders, so they can have, they can be set up for success. And this is one of the areas we're doing is this podcast, this episode. So our series for season 2 has been, hey, if you're new into leadership or you're an existing leader coming back into leadership, right, has been our theme. And what way to close it out than saying, by the way, you're not alone, and there's going to be situations where you will have to share leadership responsibilities and duties with another leader. And how about this? Even more important, how about in a global setting, right? I'll talk about different layers there for sure. Loss in translation, possible outcomes, yes, that could happen if you're not doing it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Michelle, on that notion, what are some of the, I mean, when it comes to decision making, because again, I know there's a lot of things going on. As a leader, you have the responsibility, right, of making decisions. But now you have that shared leadership aspect and that connectivity aspect. What are some best practices when it comes to decision making and ways to set up a leader for success?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. There's so many. I think that, we've had an incredible opportunity here. So even though we haven't had an actual formal shared leadership approach until about the last year and a half or so, we've actually been working with other leaders around the globe for a very long time and figuring out exactly how to make this work. So I think that with decision making, one of the most important things is making sure that everybody is involved in the conversation. So when something needs to be done, we are looking at how does it impact all regions? How does it impact all of the people that are on the team? How does it impact the different leaders? Do we need to look at the executive team and how it impacts them? And I think that one of the most important things is taking everybody into consideration. So I already talked about trust. I talked about respect. I talked about communication. Those things are so much more important. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are absolutely critical. But when you have shared leadership going on, making sure that everybody is in the loop is huge. Because if you're not including somebody, if anybody feels left out, if people aren't involved in that decision-making process, you're breaking down trust. You're breaking down respect. So what you want to do in a shared leadership situation is over communicate, making sure that every single person who needs any of the information has it. And considering, I love the word consideration. It's one of my most favorite words. And when we're looking at consideration, it's me considering you, Z, and saying, okay, what would Z need to know? And how would he want to be involved? How would Rich want to be involved? And so when I'm looking at my global team of shared leadership we do have fantastic matrix connectivity. Who do I need to make sure is always involved? And I will tell you, I always err on the side of caution and over-include and over-communicate.
Wow.
Because then when issues arise, we come together, we come to each other, and we solve those things together right then and there and put everything on the table. And we do that because the trust is there, because we're involving one another.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and that's one of the questions actually that were asked in the session. So we're going to play that clip. So Sung Yu, one of our leaders here at Insight, asked a question around that specific topic. So let's hear it out, and then we can kind of elaborate more on it.
Perfect.
Great insights. So if I were the generative AI, I'll summarize it this way: is Matrix shared leadership is a powerful thing within an organization that can really drive results. But the two critical elements are trust and communication between the leaders and the teammate they're leading, right?
Right.
What happens when, and you shared a little bit about sharing leadership philosophies, but what happens when maybe there's a breakdown in one of those spectrums where either the leaders are not communicating well, or maybe one of the leaders isn't communicating well to the teammate, and maybe there's different competing priorities, or maybe there's because obviously the solid line leader that controls the teammates' bonus and merit, has a lot of influence versus the dotted line leader that may have all these projects and things going on that's saying, like, these things are important, but then there's a conflict between those two. How do we resolve that, and how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
Okay, so we just heard that from Sung Yu. So what are your thoughts on that question, Michelle?
It's such a great question. And honestly, breakdown in trust between leadership and a shared leadership situation is awful. It's not good at all, because the question is, how does it impact the teammate? It impacts the teammate in a huge way, because as much as we like to think that as leaders, our teammates are shielded from those things that are happening, they see what's going on. So what we have to do in that situation is we have to go to that leader directly. We have to have a very candid, fierce conversation around what we need, what they need, and figure out how can we work better together. And one of the biggest things that we can do there is, if we can't get to resolution, we have to also be willing to raise that up the chain to our leaders and say, okay, we can't get here. Can you come in and help us to actually do that? But there has to be agreement between those two leaders that both agree that the outcome needs to be working better together and building that trust. If you have one person that's working against it, it's almost impossible to get there. So you have to make sure that you're having those conversations and being very, very candid and open with one another. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's really hard, and some people are better at that than others, but we have to be able to do it in a shared leadership situation so it does impact the teammate in the best possible way. Now, when it comes down to the other part of the question that he asked about merit, one person has control over that, the other person doesn't. It's the exact same answer. You have to sit down and give your input, and you have to be willing to challenge. I think that one of the things that people get lost in is, well, if I challenge them, then I'm being combative or I'm being argumentative. It's not that at all. It's, hey, I want to challenge this because this is what I have seen. Explain to me what you've seen, and maybe where is that gap, and how can we close that together? And this takes, again, that trust and respect. First of all, this builds that. Secondly, having those two things as a foundation for making sure it's successful going forward.
Yeah. Speaking of, in an environment so rich, like for you as a teammate, when you see those environments and you're like, hey, I want to speak up. Like I want to, want some input. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like, that is important to you, or no, I don't want to rock the boat, or how do you feel on that aspect?
Yeah, it's a little shaky. Obviously we all have those fears, when we're being truthful. But, it's important to get those truths out and, just kind of bring it to the table. That way it's out for everybody, right? So everybody knows we're communicating very clearly, having those transparent conversations, having those fierce conversations, right? So we can make sure we're moving forward with progression, whatever that looks like.
And I love that you said that, because the reason I asked that question is, again, if you're newer to leadership or you're starting off, or even if you are existing, that's always the hardest thing to overcome. But what's best for the teammate? We have to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
We have to lean in. And again, it's actually better off for everybody in the case, right?
Yeah.
Addressing the elephant in the room.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Well, and can I add something else, too? Because I think that question was such an important one. Our jobs as leaders is to create a safe space for our teammates to be able to come to us and tell us what's really going on. And a lot of the time this is really hard for teammates to do because, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to my boss and I'm going to give my boss constructive feedback. Like, how is that going to go? Yeah. But we have to create that safe space to where if I'm working with Z and Z can say to me, I need you to do this. This would help me to be more productive. And it's my job to provide that environment and respond in a positive way to that and say, first of all, thank you so much for telling me that. Secondly, I will absolutely try to do that. And please hold me accountable to that. And so what you're saying about how it's difficult, it's also how we as shared leaders and having those shared space have to make sure that we're creating that trusting and safe environment, psychological safety, if you will, for our teammates.
To add to that layer, right, there are, let's say, for example, there are teammates, maybe they're in a situation where they don't feel that psychological safety, right? Is having those, maybe some safety nets or opportunities for teammates to be able to share in an anonymous way, for them to get the support, the help that they need, not only them, but the leaders, right?
Absolutely.
To bring awareness and be like, and a lot of times maybe leaders aren't aware, right? They're just so focused. They're running 100 miles an hour.
That is actually most of the time what's happening is they don't have awareness there. So when you give that to them, they're like, oh my gosh, what? So.
Yeah. So awesome. So let's go to the next one. So building a framework. So that's where we're currently at right now is like, okay, we understand, right, that matrix connectivity, matrix organizations could be super complex. It's not just your traditional matrix anymore. There's so many, and that's what we're finding out in our current project. There's so many different types in environments, and to unpack that. But what, in your experience, where has it gone? Like, what was it before, and where is it now? Because it's definitely evolved, right, from its traditional.
It has, and that's kind of what I was talking about before, right? When you look at matrix management, it's been around forever. Like it's something that was put in place typically to serve clients. So you have a client, and then you have a leader, a couple of different leaders, one in solutions, maybe one in sales, and then they have people who dotted line and solid line to each of those people, and then all of those people are like a pod and they serve the clients. That's been around forever. And so that's lovely, but in those situations, again, you have one shared outcome and different roles and responsibilities to get to that shared outcome. So the alignment there is absolutely critical to understand what that outcome needs to be. Absolutely critical. But to make that successful, just like with what we're talking about now, you have to have all hands meetings team meetings, one-on-one meetings, and not just the dotted line or the solid line leader to the solid lines, but the dotted line leader to the dotted lines and everybody in between. And what people say to me most often, and we even had this conversation at Amplify, is, okay, but we don't have time to do that. And at the end of the day, it is our responsibility as leaders to make that time. Because if there is anybody on that matrix organization who does not feel connected to that shared outcome, that is when there's the breakdown in communication, trust, and let's be honest, the breakdown in the results that the client is receiving. Now, the shift is still that same thing, but the teams are getting bigger. Like, so if you look at our global HR, we have teammates in India and Manila and all over the UK and Europe, in APAC. We have teammates all over the place, Canada, the US, and there's shared leadership everywhere. And so we have to make sure that not only are we having those connection meetings, those dotted lines, but we need to be doing skips. We need to make sure that everybody has that incredible clarity through leaders' intents, leadership philosophies, understanding how people lead and how they lead differently. So there's so many tools that we all teach that we need to really incorporate into this, because now it's much more broad. It's not just one client that we're serving. It's every single, in our case, it's every single teammate around the entire globe.
Yeah.
And so it's so much bigger, and there's so many more people that are involved in many different ways.
Yeah. So we went a little deep on the first question of, the breakdown in communication, which could also lead to lack of trust and things like that. Let's kind of change the tempo and say, what are some things that we can implement or do when incorporating these strategies of shared leadership? How can we make this and fine tune it into a strategy that we can effectively utilize within an organization or globally?
Oh my goodness. Well, so I think everything we've talked about so far definitely leads into that, right? So if we're looking at, and you're asking for like tools and like that kind of like strategies there.
Absolutely.
So the connection process is huge, right? Making sure we're giving feedback. Z, you talked about giving feedback.
Yep.
If we don't feel comfortable doing it live, we have start, stop, continues. We have 360s. We have teammate pulse surveys. We have all of that. So there's great ways for us to give that. Setting a leadership intent around create clarity is huge, but holding people accountable, recognizing people. I think that at the end of the day, to be successful with our strategy of shared leadership, it's using all of the tools of being a great leader.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. A lot of times even leaders forget all the tools that are available.
Of course.
So know your tools,
Yeah.
know your resources. And then, of course, we talk about constantly, we have our leadership commitments and the tools that go along with it. If you're not actively using them and understanding them, then, again, your teammates are going to be lost, because like one leader is using them and they're talking about all these amazing tools, where the other leader is like, what are you talking about?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you mean, red team?
Right.
Like,
What's that?
yeah, what's that? I've never heard of it.
Well, so that brings up a really important point too, and I did hit on it a little bit before, but I think that it's worth mentioning again. Having the leaders connected in connection meetings is absolutely critical. And I would say, when people are like, we're so busy, I can maybe do it once a quarter. No. We've got to figure out a way to get together every other week. If you are truly driving initiatives with a shared leadership team, you have to meet more frequently. You have to be available to one another. And that's one of the biggest things with a global organization and shared leadership. There's time zone issues. And so you have to figure out how to be available to one another and support one another. And at the end of the day, always know that you're working together toward the same outcome.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it like a GPS or like a compass, right? Like if you're not having those constant connection meetings, which we call are basically our one-on-ones, is that you're going to have people going off course. And if you don't catch that early enough, they're going to be way off course. And now they have to pivot and take a long run,
Absolutely.
a long detour
Yeah.
to get back on track, right?
Yeah.
So, but there was some questions as well around this. So,
Great.
what are some common challenges teammates face? So we kind of started talking a little bit
Yeah,
about
we hit
that.
on quite a bit of those.
But the questions that were asked in there, one of them, Tabby, and I don't think you kind of already started to talk about this, but we're going to go ahead and listen to one of them. This is Tabby, one of our teammates. She asked this question in the session.
So my question does go back to that decision-making piece when it comes to shared leadership, because I do have shared leadership with my teammate in India, and time zones is a huge challenge for us. So if she does have an emergency or something comes up, I'm sleeping.
Right.
So how do you recommend dealing with those types of things, or just creating kind of that expectation and decision-making that way?
All right, Michelle. So there is exactly what you just talked about. Time
Yeah.
zones could be a challenge. So what are your thoughts on that question?
Okay, so every single person, if you're working globally and you're working within time zones, has to have a contact in the other region. So in the case of, I'll just use Tabby specifically because I understand her situation. She has Paranita who reports up through her, but we have a phenomenal HR director, Akanksha, who Paranita can go through. So the most important thing, because they do have shared leadership, is for Akanksha to always know that she is that backup and to really set that expectation with one another. And I think that once we do that, that does create that safety so that they know who they can go to if there is an emergency or if something needs to be answered right away. Because if I'm sleeping, I'm probably not going to see that.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. So yeah, not only for exactly safety concerns or updates or whatever. There's so many factors, but even when it comes to even career development opportunities, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, there's a project that I just from our local office that came up. You will be great for. Committees. Right? We have
Yes.
so many different TRGs. Teammate resource groups that we call. So there's even more exposure, more visibility when somebody there's local that you can
Yeah.
assign them to, and not necessarily then working on the same project, but at least there's somebody there. Now you have somebody in that space.
I love that. And you just brought up something so incredibly important that we did not talk about last time. I think that one of the things that we really have to do is trust the other leader to do the right thing for the teammate and to not get ever and this is hard. This is hard in many situations. Never get into, but that's my process or that's my program or that's my whatever. Instead of doing that, making sure that you're constantly remembering that what we are doing is working toward a shared outcome. That's what we are doing. And so if Angela, for example, who I work very, very closely with in almost every matrix leadership that I have, if she and I are sharing leadership, always knowing that the decision that she's going to make is because she's taking into consideration everything she knows based on everything we talk about. And so if I go in and I'm like, nope, ownership, I'm sorry, that's mine, it's going to get me nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? Because she understands enough about what we're doing. I understand enough about what she's doing to be able to make those decisions and to be able to work together to the best possible outcome and taking ego out of it. And sometimes that's really hard to do because if you've run something for 10 years and somebody is like, ooh, I have this idea and we're going to do this. It's like, what? Hey. But it's taking that out of it and saying, ooh, you know what, I actually really like that. And allowing for that space to really collaborate and to figure out the best possible solution.
Yeah, and for clarity, when you said Angela, she's your counterpart or HR leader in
Europe. And she's in the UK. Yeah, so she's amazing. So, and we have quite a few people actually that really dotted line up to her and then solid line into our team.
Yeah.
And then there's people on her team that we help support all the time as well. So an incredible relationship. I will say that, I don't know if Angela will ever see this, but it is probably my most favorite successful example of that that I have had because we've been working together, not even officially, but we're working together since 2017.
Yeah.
And really building those relationships and figuring out how to really operationalize these things to have the best possible outcome.
Which actually goes to another point. I just love when we have these episodes because it branches out to another tip, right? Is build those relationships. Even though you may not be working at any capacity, you
Yes.
never know when you will.
Right.
And you already laid the framework of that trust, right?
Exactly.
Like, oh my gosh, I get to finally work with you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Finally get to work with you, Rich. And that's already been established instead of starting from the beginning and building those deposits and so forth.
Right.
So that's a great tip. And again, I just came out of nowhere.
I know. I love that. I love when that happens.
So another tool that we're working on is ERACI, or how you pronounce it. So it's responsibilities, accountability, consulting, and inform.
Yep.
Having some kind of clear, right? Like these are the roles and responsibilities of the leader, of the teammate, of the matrix leader, or the site leader, right? Whatever that is. By having those clear direction, now it's like, hey, I need to take time off. Who do I notify?
Absolutely.
Well, notify your direct leader, but also your matrix leader or your site leader for
Absolutely.
whatever reason. Those things are just, you basically, clarify, those situations when they come up. You're just like, I don't know where to go.
Right.
Here is the roles and responsibilities.
Well, and if we have team meetings, it helps us to do that as well. So if we have team meetings where, so we have an HR executive meeting where all of my shared leaders are all on one call. so we can talk about that. And then we have our team meeting, Z, where we have everybody on the call. And then we have a leadership meeting as well. So we have lots of connections in that way. But I think there's a lot of best practices there that people can really focus on. So when you're talking about time off with our team, one of the biggest things that we do is, obviously you talk to your leader and let them know when you're going to be gone, but you put that meeting request on every single person's calendar on that team, including the extended global team. I don't think I've ever sent a meeting request without every single HR leader on it, in addition to everybody on my team.
Yeah.
Because then all of those shared leaders, we've already talked about Angela and Akanksha, and there's so many more. Every single person knows that I'll be out. So they know that in that situation, my team might be reaching out, my solid lines might be reaching out to them directly, even if they don't dotted line to them, because they need support in one of the regions. And it works so well. So there's lots of little tips and tricks that work to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts about another meeting, another connection when you think of that?
At first it's like, oh man, another meeting.
Overwhelming.
But, yes, yeah, definitely overwhelming. But, it's one of those necessary points to create that clarity, right? You want to go into any situation with clear expectations, what you're supposed to be doing, what everybody else's roles are. That way you can operate smoothly and efficiently, right? So.
Yeah, and make sure that it's intentional. You do truly have a meeting where you're providing updates and you're keeping people informed. And then I'm always going to say this, right? If you are done and you're done, everything's been addressed. Yeah, maybe connect some more or whatever. But hey, give people the gift of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Every
time.
I always talk about that time. I know when the best gift that you can give anybody in work is just time back. I just see people literally celebrate like a touchdown excitement. Like, oh my gosh.
5 whole minutes.
Yeah, they cancel my call because it's taken care of. Right?
Exactly. And can I just say one thing really quickly about what we were just talking about? Those human connections are the ways to build trust and respect. %. And those are the ways that we can have accountability conversations, fierce conversations, goal conversations, results conversations, celebration conversations, because we actually are taking that time. If we don't have those connections, we don't build those relationships.
Yep.
And at the core of everything that Insight is working on and everything we're doing are the people. Yep. And the connection that they have to the people around them and to the results that they're driving.
Yeah. So we had one more question, and again, it fall in line exactly when it comes to those challenges that can come up. So this is from Andre, a sales rep. So we'll go ahead and listen to his question, and then we'll talk about it.
So what I'm finding is that for my teammates, sometimes they feel like there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Yep. Right? That's the biggest thing. I see Shelly. We work together, our teammates work together, different departments, right? But, whether it has to do with sales, whether it has to do whatever, it's just too many cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes I think the clarity is not there. And I think that's something that I feel I need to work better at. Right. But I feel like I'm not there to make those decisions sometimes. Sometimes they're being made in engineering, let's say, rather than sales. Right. And I don't even get to be part of that, right? So I'm having the difficulty, like, how do we inject myself in there and make sure that the team knows that we're going to follow a same goal and that there is a unity, and they understand that even if Shelly says something or somebody else says something, that the focus is the same and the goal is the same, right? It might not be coming from me, but as long as we understand that we're meeting that goal, but they don't see it that way. Sometimes they see it as, there's too many cooks in this kitchen. I'm getting orders from everywhere.
All right, so that was a great question from Andre. Again, another a great example of some challenges that can come up. So, Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think this goes back to making sure, because they're talking about the leadership team being connected. When he did ask that question, one of the things, I didn't do a very good job of keeping my mic right in front of me because I had so many more clarifying questions for him. And one of those was, do you have those connection meetings with other leaders? Do you have a leadership team meeting? And the answer was no. And it came back to what we were just talking about, the time. The time is very, very difficult. Everybody's super busy. We have all of these different deliverables for our clients. So how can we actually make that happen? And one of the things that we talked about is doing them less frequently, but making sure that those are always on the calendar and that you're building those relationships separately as well. And talking through goals. So if we know something big is coming up, who's responsible to make that decision? Who is responsible for the impact of that decision? And who needs to be involved in whether it's the process of actually making it happen or the actions or whatever it is? How do we do that? And so I think that I know that I keep saying it over and over and over again, but it really comes back to relationship building. And sometimes it's still going to happen. No matter how connected you are, there are times that something is going to happen, a decision is going to be made, and it's going to impact your team, and you are not going to be involved. And if that is the case, The only thing that you can do in that situation is to reach out to that leader or those leaders and set up time and have a conversation of, hey, where was the breakdown? What happened? And really holding each other accountable for the breakdown of that process, because nobody was doing anything out of bad intent most often, right? Majority of the time, we're not trying to do it because, oh, I'm going to leave Z out of this one because I know he has a different opinion. That's not how it typically goes. No. It's just we're moving fast.
That's it.
And so it's pulling everybody back in and saying, okay, when this happened, here was the impact. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again. So how can we solve this together? And it's really partnership, because every team's going to work differently, but that partnership is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I'm going to tie in some technology now. So leveraging our tools and technology now, I mean, we're in an era of our AI.
Oh, yeah.
And, there's, Copilot now and these things. Like, it's like understanding this technology, and a lot of teams are already doing a good job with this. If someone couldn't make the meeting, the capturing of the notes, the summarizing, yes, you can record the session, but if someone can literally just go, here's a summary, here are the action items for each individual, it's just like,
it's amazing.
Yeah. And again, I understand sometimes if we can't make it, something came up, let's, we still need to connect. Let's connect, but let's keep everybody in the loop.
Always.
Which is exactly the tool that's out there right now, which is so awesome. All right, cool. We're going to go with our final question and go to final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the illustration you gave with our U.S. teammate working with an India teammate and how to leverage the two. And that kind of rolls in nicely with our next topic of how we leverage shared leadership to expand our organizationally globally, and what the impacts of that are. What are some, maybe best practices or some staples that absolutely need to be, key for critical implementation?
Yeah. I think clarity around goals is absolutely key. We have, our goal process. We have it in MTC. Some people use it, some don't. Some use OneNote, some use spreadsheets, some whatever it is. But I think at the end of the day, the goal is to have the goal that everybody's working toward. And I think that's best practice to make sure everybody actually understands it and everybody understands that outcome. So that's huge. But I think the rest of it goes back to what we've talked about already, being willing to hold people accountable, being willing to have those connection meetings, using Recognize to celebrate the shared matrixed team and recognizing everybody, not just your solid lines. I think that's one of the biggest things that we run into with a breakdown of trust is that, that leader just saw their team and the people that officially report to them, but our team over here, that's dotted line to them, we didn't get recognized for that, and we were just as involved. And so making sure that, again, it goes back to consideration, making sure that you are considering who made the impact, who was involved, and who needs to have all that information and keeping that there. Holding people accountable to the goals, looking at leaders' intent, making sure that you have those so everybody's on the same page. I cannot stress enough the leadership philosophy when you have two different leaders who have responsibility for the same teammates in different ways, understanding how they lead similarly and understanding how they lead differently. And those conversations with your teammates are really, really important, because I might be we have connection meetings every single week. We talk through every single thing that you're working on and let's go through your goals and let's celebrate the good stuff and blah, blah, blah. And the other leader might be, we're going to meet once a month and we're going to do like a performance management thing and we're going to pull up your goals and if it's different like that, our teammates have to understand what we're doing so that there's never a surprise and they can still build those relationships within different ways of leading.
Yeah. No, again, those are all great. And just to clarify for those that are listening outside of Insight, MTC is our platform to performance management or to manage team, to manage goals and so on.
Yeah,
right?
it houses all of our teammate information.
Yeah. Yep. So, but okay, well, Michelle, those are again great examples. And I think just before we go to our final summary wrap up, what does a perfect world look like when we finally know, like, hey, we have it together. As a team, as an organization, like, paint that picture for me. What's a perfect world in the connective and the shared leadership?
Really hard question. It's a really hard question because it's really everything that I said. But I'm a people person, as y'all know, most of you know, and everything's about the people. So I think that when everybody feels as if they are a part of that outcome, that's a perfect world. Things can still break. We can still have to hold people accountable. We can still have conflict. We can still have fierce conversations. But if I feel like I'm involved in something bigger, we've succeeded.
It's perfect mic drop moment.
Yeah. We have nothing else to say. No.
So, Rich,
No.
what was your biggest takeaway from today's episode?
Yeah, no, I mean, I really like the connectivity, being, just keeping everybody in the loop, right? Making sure everybody has the same understanding that we're tracking towards a common goal, right? So that in itself, building trust, the small things about, communicating and over communicating to be able to build that trust, which is just a foundational level. It sets up that foundation for just the next steps and to keep progressing and to make your team stronger.
The future looks bright in your future looks bright in the connective shared leadership world, my friend.
Love it.
I appreciate
Michelle, any final thoughts? Any final advice to close out?
No, I think that the big thing is just communicate, build trust with your teammates and the leaders around you. And don't be afraid to say what you think and make it hearable. Be respectful and be very, very open to other people's thoughts, and when they're being respectful and making it hearable, even if it is constructive. I think that that's the best possible way that we can continue to be effective in a shared leadership space, because there's lots of different opinions out there and different ways that we can do things. And we have to be really willing to come together to make that happen.
Yeah, and I purposely roll up my sleeves today because I'm saying, hey, just roll up your sleeves.
Right.
Get
That's
ready
it.
to engage in those conversations. If you ignore it, if you don't actively engage in it, nothing's ever going to happen. It's actually going to get worse because nobody is having those true difficult conversations that need to happen. And ultimately, as a leader, we have a responsibility to help not only our team grow, our organization to grow, but also just overall responsibility to make sure that we're there, right? To be that compass, that GPS, whatever it is, to make sure that we're heading on the right direction to accomplish those goals.
So in today's episode, we've discussed how shared leadership with the framework of matrix management has helped us find a different approach to leadership and teamwork. Great pieces of information here. I'm sure we could have gone for another half hour in this episode.
Easily.
So thank you all for tuning in. And if you enjoyed today's content, please hit the like button. Be sure to turn on your notifications and subscribe to Leading with Insight. Thank you all for joining us, and until next time.